Everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited about this webinar. We were hoping that the sort of stories from the community would complement the empirical work that's coming out of the Healing Community Study. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists as speakers today, talking about community-led innovations. You'll hear a little bit about the communities themselves, the specific challenges they faced, and the evidence-based practices they picked, and what was the outcome. Just a couple of housekeeping tasks before I introduce our first speaker. Just let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it'll be available to watch on demand following the conclusion. Also, attendees will receive certificates of completion that can be submitted for CEU credit. And finally, we will hold the asking of questions till the end of the presentations. Along the way, I encourage you to use the Q&A button to pose questions that I'll then use to moderate the discussion between the speakers at the end. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. This is my friend Radonna Chandler. She's the director of the Healing Community Study. One fun fact about Radonna is that she was once part of a FBI hostage negotiation team, which I think prepared her well for serving as the director of the Healing Community Study. She's going to provide a little overview and context of the study. Radonna?
Thank you, Scott. Bear with me for just a second while my slides load up, where I'm sharing my screen. Can you all see the slides?
You want to flip it?
There we go.
There we go.
Flip. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to provide a very quick high-level overview of the study for those of you who are not familiar with the Healing Community Study. The study was funded in April of 2019 by NIDA and SAMHSA, and it was funded initially to be able to find community-driven solutions to dealing with the opioid overdose crisis and opioid use disorder. The study included 67 communities across the 4 states that you see there. And it included a total population of over 10 million lives from the 67 communities in those states. The primary goal was to reduce opioid-related overdose fatalities with really important secondary outcomes to increase naloxone distribution, increase access and utilization of MOUD, and decrease high-risk opioid prescribing. Here are baseline characteristics of the communities at the time the study started. I won't read through all of those, but you can see the overall population. You can see really high opioid overdose death rates per 100,000 for all of the states with, an overall average of 33.4. We felt it was really important to include rural and urban communities, recognizing that there's diversity in terms of infrastructure, culture, and solutions that would work in a rural versus an urban setting. So you see a breakdown there. And all of the states that were funded to participate just happened to be Medicaid expansion states. So the Healing Communities Study implemented an intervention called the Communities That Heal intervention that had 3 main components. There was a community engagement component that was driven largely by diverse community coalitions and expertise to enhance the selection of evidence-based practices and the implementation of those. They were provided with the opioid reduction continuum of care approach, which was a menu of strategies that supported the implementation of evidence-based practices along with technical assistance guides. And then there were community-based health communications campaigns that were intended to reduce stigma and increase awareness and adoption of EBPs. So community engagement was the initial component and the foundation for the study. Coalitions were formed across all of the communities. Initially, Kentucky and Ohio built off of existing coalition infrastructure, while New York and Massachusetts built their own coalitions. They worked through a phased approach to examine local data, then select evidence-based practices based on that data, identify partner organizations, implement the EBPs, and then monitor progress. And then they also supported communications campaigns. So here you can see a little bit about the coalition infrastructure. Coalitions were diverse and they included anywhere from 25 to 40 members with lots of different expertise and perspectives. We had leadership roles around program management, data coordination, community engagement, and communications champions. And then you can see the composition and the types of members that belonged to the coalitions. They had a wide array of responsibilities, including serving on the coalitions, participating and helping to conduct a community needs assessment, and then data-driven selection and implementation of the evidence-based practices. And then this is a slide that just shows you the different stages that I had discussed of community engagement, where you see that they started with preparation, went all the way up through implementing and monitoring and sustainability with different discrete activities under each of these categories. So the ORCA was a menu of strategies to help with the implementation of evidence-based practices in 3 really important areas: overdose prevention, education, and naloxone distribution, the delivery of medication for opioid use disorder, and safer prescribing, dispensing, and disposal of opioids. We targeted 3 different sectors for the implementation of evidence-based practices: health and public health settings, justice and criminal legal settings, and behavioral health settings. So this is just a snapshot of the EBP data. A total of over 1,000 strategies were selected by communities, and you can see how they were broken down between our intervention communities that received our intervention initially and our control communities that participated in the intervention later on, after data were collected and they were compared to the intervention community. So you see that there were a lot of strategies that were selected across the different menus and a lot of strategies that then went on to be implemented. And you're going to hear more from the community perspective about some of the examples from those strategies. As I said, we also felt that public health communications campaigns were really important, knowing the role that they could play in changing the hearts and minds of community members. We produced over 6,000 different products related to our campaigns, and you can see some of those here at the bottom of the slide. The topics included naloxone, medication for opioid use disorder, and staying on medication for opioid use disorder. The goals, again, were to increase the adoption of evidence-based practices and to reduce stigma. And our priority audiences included providers, community leaders, people with lived experience, and just general members of the community. Here are some of the examples across the 4 states of products that were developed. It included everything, as you can see, from billboards to sleeves for coffee cups, and included, really importantly, local individuals and their images, as well as being set in places that people would recognize locally, whether it was a particular landmark, and also in languages, in many languages for those who were at risk within the communities. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge and thank all of the people that worked on the study, the community advisory boards, key government officials, coalitions, community partners, investigators, and staff. There were hundreds of people that worked on this, and it really took a village to launch the Human Community Study. And that is it for me. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Radonna. That was a great overview of, I didn't think you could do it in 10 minutes. That was awesome. So that was a great overview of what is an incredibly complex study. One of the things that makes it complex, as you can imagine, is every community was different and everyone required a custom solution. So our first speaker is going to talk about one of those custom solutions in Louisville, Kentucky. So let me introduce Ben Goldman. Ben leads the Behavioral Health Equity Team at the Louisville Metro Public Health and Wellness Department. Under his leadership, the team launched an overdose quick response team, and also helped Louisville become the first city in the South to provide Narcan to people inside of jail dorms. It's a pretty unique niche. One fun fact about Ben is that years before he worked in public health, he actually lived in an abandoned public health clinic. So there you go. Set the stage. All right, Ben, take it away.
All right. How's it looking in slideshow?
Looks great.
Thank you, thank you. So, as Scott mentioned, I represent Louisville Metro government. We are a consolidated city and county government. So the largest city in Jefferson County is Louisville, Kentucky, but we also have 82 other smaller towns in the county who are all falling under the work of this project. Louisville is famously the birthplace of Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer of all times. The Louisville Slugger Bat Company, the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, the Kentucky Derby. Yum Brands, the owner of Kentucky Fried Chicken, and of course, bourbon. We are also regularly in the top 10 communities in this country of cities experiencing high rates of age-adjusted overdoses. Our whole community experiences these overdoses, but we disproportionately see these in our western part of our county, in the western part of Louisville. This is in part due to segregation and historic redlining that concentrated wealth and resources in the eastern, disproportionately white part of our community, while concentrating poverty and lack of services and resources in our western part of the county. In 2021, we saw the population most impacted by overdose fatalities to be our Black residents for the first time in history, and that inequity has continued to grow in the past 2 years. In both 2022 and 2023, we saw a community-wide decrease in fatal overdoses, but an increase among our Black residents. However, when Healing Communities studies came, we also had some strengths and opportunities that I want to focus on. There was a growing acceptance of harm reduction in Jefferson County, particularly naloxone distribution. Kentucky had only legalized syringe exchanges less than 10 years ago, and it's only really been in the past 6 years that we've gotten large-scale naloxone distribution, but we have seen really a majority of residents be supportive of overdose prevention through naloxone distribution. We also have a very tightly knit community of folks who work in substance use. We've kind of gotten past the competitive piece where people are arguing over the best treatment modality or the best pathway to health, and really just we're all kind of working together, taking help wherever we can get it. We were beneficiaries of really strong advocacy from the HEAL staff, who acknowledged that local residents were the experts on the local conditions and tailored our interventions based off of the coalition's guidance. And then because both of the evidence-based practices I'm going to share today involved our local jail, I just want to lift up that really strong partnership going into the projects between our health department and local jail, both after the COVID pandemic and a lot of collaboration to save lives there, and then navigating an overdose crisis in the jail. So the first evidence-based practice I want to highlight is overdose education and naloxone distribution at Louisville Metro Department of Corrections. We had previously stood up, as Scott mentioned, naloxone in the dorm program so that incarcerated people could reverse overdoses of other incarcerated people. Over 30 lives have been saved by incarcerated people since that was stood up. We also had an opt-out program where anyone exiting the jail who had a diagnosis of a substance use disorder or who had experienced withdrawal while incarcerated or was in on drug charges would receive naloxone in their property. Like the rest of the country, we were really seeing a spike in overdoses among people who did not have opioid use disorder. These are people who might use stimulants like methamphetamine and cocaine that was increasingly being laced with fentanyl and other synthetic opioids, as well as people using unregulated pills that they were purchasing not from a pharmacy, and similarly counterfeit pills containing synthetic opioids. So really, we wanted to stand up a program where anyone exiting the jail was able to access naloxone without having to sort of qualify. But the jail is a little unpredictable in when people exit. You know, they are open 24 hours a day, with the exception of 2 shift changes. A person could be released any one of those 24 hours. And so it wasn't feasible to have a staff member in the exit lobby. We also know that some folks don't necessarily want to talk to someone. So the community settled on this idea of a vending machine. It's called a vending machine, but as you can see, it says free. It said free many, many places on it so that folks understood that they did not have to pay. And then we paired that with both video content that was played in the secure side of the jail, and then in-person trainings taking place in the dorms. There were educational resources, including healing community study brochures on the adjacent wall. And we managed to have a staff member part-time be sort of embedded in that space, helping folks navigate the machine, but then also talking about other resources that were available in the community. The other evidence-based practice that was incredibly successful at the Department of Corrections was the Navigator. Our department has worked with the jail to scale up their medication for opioid use disorder programming, now offering both methadone and buprenorphine to incarcerated people. But as you can imagine, as I mentioned before, discharge is a little bit unpredictable. It's hard to know when people are going to be released. So having a navigator to help ease that warm handoff when folks were being released to make sure that they got services out in the community as well was critically important. And then even just being able to keep people engaged and visit them in the meanwhile, while they were waiting to be released, really provided a strong care advocate for our incarcerated population. We saw this navigator as well as a crucial partner for our overdose quick response team. As I mentioned before, there had been a number of overdoses in the jail, including 5 fatal overdoses. And typically the quick response team was able to visit anyone who experienced an overdose and just sort of do a wellness visit, check in with folks and talk to them about engaging in services both in the jail and upon their release. But because we weren't in the secure side, we weren't able to provide that up to the minute guidance and keep track of people in the system for when they were released. So that navigator successfully linked a lot of people who we might otherwise have missed out on. Some quick outcomes. In the 15 months that this project has been operational, we've distributed 1,177 units of naloxone. I know it says Narcan, but in there, we switched to some generic for some of that time. We've seen disproportionately female residents access naloxone through this, which is surprising because the jail is, like many jails, disproportionately male. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the reason behind that in the lessons learned section. We also saw disproportionate to the community, a high number of our Black and African American residents accessing naloxone, but relative to the jail population, it was not a disproportionate amount. The services that we've been able to sustain, that vending machine operates to this day. We have funding secured to keep it operational indefinitely, and even plans in the near future to add fentanyl test strips, wound care kits, and HIV self-tests to that machine. We've partnered with a local grassroots harm reduction organization, the Kentucky Harm Reduction Coalition, to implement another health educator in that space, sort of providing a little extra navigation for folks as they're leaving. Lessons learned, that population that was served, really our goal in this project was to reach people who were exiting incarceration. It was in the exit lobby of the jail. We know that the risk is astronomically higher for people exiting incarceration to experience an overdose relative to the general population. And so we really wanted to prioritize that population. But what we realized, having that person wait in the exit lobby, was that a lot of the people who were accessing the naloxone from the machine were not leaving the jail. They were coming into that exit lobby where there was also a machine for putting money on a loved one's books or retrieving property from a person who was currently incarcerated. So that was kind of an added bonus we didn't anticipate. But lots of the people who would be reversing the overdose of someone exiting incarceration were also accessing naloxone. We have not been able to maintain that navigator position, so we're seeking funding for that. That's a much harder niche to fill, but I think the proof is there. We've kind of had a proof of concept of how useful that position can be, so I'm optimistic that we may be able to fund that again in the future. And then having the listening sessions in the dorms with incarcerated people prior to our rollout of this, on just some of the messaging and location of the machine, lots of ideas came up that really hadn't been on our radar. The biggest one being, the key theme we heard in almost every single dorm we went to from multiple people was they were grateful that this machine was going to be put in the exit lobby and they could get it on their way out, but that nobody ever would want to come back to the jail to get a second unit or a third unit, and that they really want those machines in their home neighborhood. So we had lots of locations that were proposed to us for additional vending machines. We don't have funding to put a ton of vending machines in the community, but with partnership from Kentucky Opioid Response Effort, our local state opioid response team, we were able to fund 200 Nalox boxes, which are a much lower tech version of the vending machine. They're just a box that hangs on the wall. It's unlocked and it has a sign next to it saying free naloxone. We work with community partners who refill those boxes. We don't get the same granularity of data that we get for the vending machine, but we also have not had any technical difficulties whatsoever. And we've really seen a lot of people enjoy receiving anonymous, confidential, free naloxone in their home neighborhood. The other lesson learned that I want to highlight, we didn't do this as a communications campaign or as a way to gain kind of earned media attention, but this was a huge news story. That's something that every local TV station wanted to cover. Our local paper covered it, lots and lots of news coverage, and it really just gave us an opportunity to highlight overdose education and naloxone distribution and talk about why it's critically important, but also a way to destigmatize it and just make the case that all of us should be carrying naloxone. This is something that's evidence-based. It's a way that we can take care of our neighbors and save the lives of our loved ones. And we really got overwhelmingly positive coverage that amplified that message. And we even had people who came to the jail who had no connection to the jail to get a unit in the early days of those news stories being out. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Ben. That was terrific. Kentucky did fabulous work in the jails. All right, so just a word about the question and answer. So a reminder, please go ahead and pose your questions in the Q&A as they come up, and we'll cover those once all the speakers are done. So let me introduce our next speaker. We're zooming into to Cayuga County, New York, and let me introduce Monica Salvage. Monica previously led the county's opioid response efforts as part of the Healing Community Study. And congratulations are in order. Monica recently secured a $1.1 million grant from New York State Department of Health to expand their harm reduction services. So congratulations, Monica. And one fun fact is that Monica has spent exactly half her life in her home country of Austria and the other half in different parts of the world. So here you go, Monica.
Thank you, Scott, for the introductions and also for the opportunity to be here today. Let me just open up slides here. Let me know if you can see it full screen.
Looks great.
Okay, awesome. So, I'm talking to you today about the work that has happened in Cayuga County. So where is Cayuga County? We're a small and rural county in upstate New York. And the county touches 8 lakes, some of the Finger Lakes in the region, and then the Great Lake, Ontario to the north. We have lots of trails, not just the hiking kinds. We have wine and beer and cheese and even a sweet trail. So we do a lot of fun stuff. Like I said, we are rural, which is not to say we do have a city center in pretty much the center of the county, the city of Auburn, which is also the adopted home of Harriet Ann, where she died and is buried now. But we also have a very challenging geographic. So from the center of the city of Auburn, people have to drive an hour from the north and an hour from the south to get there. And since this is also our service hub, you can imagine that it's very difficult in terms of transportation, getting services, getting supplies, getting help. So we have about a population of 74,000, and fun fact, we have more cattle than people in the county. So I leave it at that for our rural and agricultural roots. The Healing Community Study has done a lot of things for us. In terms of the resources they provided and also the focus that it helped us keep on overdoses when we're all struggling with the pandemic. Today, I want to highlight how we were able to reduce the stigma around substance use by increasing the public discourse around it, and also how we were able to reduce overdose deaths by increasing our Narcan access. It was really important to us, and we learned that over time that it's not enough just to add services and hope people will take it. We need to bring the public along and let them know why it is important and how they can help and get people comfortable using Narcan. It doesn't help us if they're somewhere in the drawer. So let me take you on a quick scroll through the evolution of our by now pretty comprehensive Narcan distribution program and how we educated the public on the topic at the same time. So for every aspect of the program that we added, we rolled out a public information campaign with different voices from different perspectives. So we started pretty humble. Just barely over 100 Narcan were distributed just before the pandemic. And when everything was shut down, we knew we had to get Narcan out and fast. So we developed an online portal on our website where people could get trained, request Narcan, and then we mail it to them. And this was especially huge for our people in the rural areas who had very scarce access to Narcan before and now could get it in their mailbox. And it was also very confidential. We also distributed a community mailer that every household had in their mailbox, where we told them what Narcan was, why it was important that they have it, and direct them to our website where they could get it. So that was also a big talking point because that was something new, like this wasn't talked about before much. And also it gave us a huge push, like that we had a lot of requests after that. Throughout the pandemic, we were also putting up pop-up trainings in hard-hit neighborhoods and in towns and villages where we saw overdoses happening. And that was important, not just for getting Narcan into people's hands, but it also started those conversations with community members, why they should care, why they should have Narcan, even though they don't know anybody who's doing drugs. And it started those conversations, and it started reducing the stigma around Narcan and also around people who were using drugs. And we also had a trainer who coordinated all those efforts, who was a person with lived experience, and his life had been saved with Narcan. So that made those trainings not just very personal, but also very authentic. And then combined with that, we had a lot of media coverage around the efforts that we're doing, talking about harm reduction, talking about misconceptions around addiction and substance use. And again, keeping that conversation going and keeping people talking about that issue, which did not happen before. So 2021, still very much in the pandemic, we added wall boxes that Ben alluded to before in public places like gas stations and motels and parks. By now, we have over 200 of those boxes throughout the county. And besides providing a destigmatized access to Narcan, as we were looking for partner sites who let us put up those boxes in or outside their buildings, again, we had those conversations with business owners or leaders of organizations, why they should care, why it is important for their staff, and what it tells the community if they participate in that effort. We also learned that it's not enough just to drop off those boxes and hope that people put it up. It's better to bring a drill and actually hang them up so they're ready to go and we can actually put Narcan in. In combination, we found it important as we were doing community outreach and promotion of our services that we are working with local people in recovery to tell their stories, to tell their story of hope and recovery and where they are in life right now. Again, to address that stigma. And we found this to be the most authentic and honest way, and also healing for the individuals themselves who found themselves on bus ads and billboards, and people would walk up to them and actually start talking to them because they put themselves out there with their not so flattering stories sometimes of their past. And people felt comfortable confiding in them and telling them about their struggles, or their brother who was having an issues with drugs, for instance. So again, this worked for our community. I had a lot of trepidation about utilizing people in recovery for that purpose, but thankfully we had very positive feedback, and it benefited the people themselves and also the community by seeing different faces and what they are doing now. So here, again, another person in recovery. The second person here is a doctor who we utilized for the Healing Community Study to prescribe medications for opioid use disorder. He's also a person in recovery himself, and we had them on our materials. And then again, sharing those stories, showing that there is hope and that people recover in different ways. Following year, we found, stigma is still one of the biggest barriers for people to seek help and to actually talk about their substance use. And so we expanded from going to communities that were hard hit with overdoses to actually addressing businesses and organizations and talking to them about training their staff. That wasn't always easy because people tend to not want to have anything to do with this, especially when you're a business owner or a manager. But it helped us, again, getting into places where people worked, where people did business, where people were socializing, like at community events, for instance, and again, expanding that conversation about addiction and normalizing it in that way. We also started getting into schools to talk to our young people about it. Again, very hard conversations with superintendents and principals about letting us in there and doing that. Unfortunately, sometimes it took an overdose for people to realize we need this. That's not what we want to have happen, but it does happen. And also those conversations, again, are very emotional. Those are safe places where people can talk about their own experiences, and most of those trainings have those experiences come out. Like at BOCES, for instance, a young student broke down crying because her brother died of an overdose, and now she sits in this classroom, learns how to use Narcan, and takes home Narcan that she didn't have when her brother died. And would he be still alive, right? So those are those kinds of conversations, very hard, but also that's what we want to have. We distributed and created actually materials around stigma. That's how important it was to us to talk about the words that matter. Again, this was a community-wide mailer, and that got us a lot of positive feedback because people don't want to be offensive on purpose, but oftentimes they don't know what else to say. So this is almost like a reference for people, like, how can I address people and behavior that is not offensive? And then again, personal stories that bring home, that it can happen to any one of us. Like, for instance, here, the director of our peer organization, who for the first time shared her own personal story of recovery, very powerful for the people that she worked with and also her professional colleagues. And then we had a 16-year-old who got Narcan trained in health class and then ended up saving her neighbor's life with Narcan. And that was a pretty big deal when we heard about that. And you know, she shared her account also publicly in an article, and we gave her a proclamation for the Cuba County Legislature. And it was really a big deal to hear it from the other side and what it was like for her to save somebody's life. Plus, she's super brave, obviously, for doing that. So, and then in the final year of the Healing Community Study, we utilized the last of our money and purchased a harm reduction kiosk that is now at our mental health center here with all sorts of harm reduction materials. And that also has been a great resource, again, for destigmatized access to those supplies. And we're also very proud that PBS NewsHour came to Cuba County and filmed a segment on rural health challenges and talked to all sorts of people in the county about our Narcan distribution program. So that gave us a lot of national attention and follow-ups on that. And that's the QR code to that. So overall, from humble beginnings, you know, by now we have over 2,000 Narcan kits that are being distributed per year, which again, this number is not the main number that I'm looking for. It's more like, are people using it? And I just read an article about a different community somewhere where they were saying, well, it's great that we're distributing Narcan, but people are afraid to use it. In Cuba County, we can say people are not afraid to use it because we have data who proves otherwise. So our overdose data mapping system, data ODMAP, shows us that overdose witnesses have helped save 141 lives with Narcan since 2020. So more often than not, an overdose witness has already administered Narcan when first responders arrive on the scene. And this is not what we've seen before. And we did not expect that. We did not work towards that. This data just showed up, and it just tells us that people are actually comfortable using it. And for us, this is because of those efforts we did, educating the public and not just throwing out Narcan and hoping for the best. We've also been able to reduce our fatality rate, cut it in half, and reduce our overdose deaths to pre-pandemic levels, finally. So those are all good news so far. We know, or we've learned what works in our community, and as we're learning more, we're sustaining and expanding substance use and harm reduction programs with federal and state funds, and we hope to continue fill gaps as we find them. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. I really like the way Cuba is able to capitalize on those stories. And if you haven't seen the PBS NewsHour, it's really terrific. I actually showed it a few weeks ago. I did a little talk for our local Young Men's Service League. So these are all high school students. To be able to see a high school student who actually was able to do, to impact is pretty remarkable. So that's terrific. So moving on, I want to introduce Pedro Alvarez. And Pedro is the Director of Operations for Harm Reduction at Tapestry Health in Springfield. Pedro serves as a board president for the consortium, which works to create conditions in which people with lived experience can fully participate in decision-making. And one fun fact about Pedro is that he is a sneakerhead. And so that clicking sound is 100 people Googling sneakerhead right now, Pedro. And Pedro is going to talk about their work in Holyoke.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. So good afternoon, everybody. Like Scott said, my name is Pedro Alvarez. We can click over to the next slide, Brayden. Thank you. All right, so just a little quick facts about Holyoke. It is the birthplace of volleyball and home of the Volleyball Hall of Fame. Some lifelong residents will argue that basketball was also created here, but our neighboring city gets credit for that over in Springfield. But definitely that's up for debate, definitely. Holyoke's among one of the first planned industrial cities, known as the paper city. Once produced 80% of its U.S. writing paper. Just to kind of give a snapshot of the community there, it was a bunch of paper mills along the canals, as you can see with the image here. There's just like the blues, the water On the right side, a lot of the paper mills were located in that area. A lot of them have since shut down, outsourced, and moved to different areas, and just left the gap for employment as well for some folks. Population of roughly 40,000 people. Latinos form the city's largest minority group, with the largest Puerto Rican population per capita of any American city outside of Puerto Rico. There are certain sections in Holyoke that's a man-made island due to the canals for the factories and the Connecticut River that runs through there, and it's referred to as Little Puerto Rico at times. Definitely a large concentration of Hispanics living in Holyoke. The city has a total of 22.8 square miles, broken into 15 distinct neighborhoods. And the reason I kind of put that bullet point up there, on the next slide, you'll see that there's a section that's highlighted in yellow. That's the downtown area. A lot of the work is focused in that area. The star that you see on the map there, that was the only methadone clinic that we had at the time prior to the Healing Community Study coming into Holyoke. The blue little symbol that you see there is the new methadone clinic that I'll be talking about later. That was one of the practices that we did here through the Healing Community Study. And the purple little heart is where I worked out of as at the syringe access program in Holyoke. In 2019, I was serving as the assistant director for urban drug user health and outreach. So a lot of my work was concentrated in the Holyoke area, Springfield as well. At the little purple heart is where we were located and had our syringe access program. Where that blue symbol is at to the star, that's roughly 4 miles from the downtown area to the closest methadone clinic in Holyoke. In 2019, Holyoke had a total of 19 fatal overdoses. In 2020, that number grew to 21. That was right when the study was started. That's also when we got hit with COVID and had to deal with a worldwide pandemic as well. I was very instrumental coming into this, the Healing Community Study when it first started as a CAB member representing Holyoke. Had an opportunity to start right when it got started, even identifying our fiscal agent, which was quite challenging at first. We wanted an agency that can come in and not have so many restrictions when we hire, or we want to do different practices there. So again, just seeking out an agency that would be our fiscal agent. We didn't want it to be too law enforcement or too, caught up with the bureaucracy that you would find in hospitals or anything like that. So we went with a community agency that was our fiscal agent for the study. Like I said, Tapestry's daily outreach work focused on downtown area in a 4-block radius that's highlighted in the yellow there. This area does have a lot of activity, as far as, a lot of foot traffic, a lot of individuals out in the community as well, and opportunity to kind of engage the general public that we would see out there. And again, the methadone clinic over 3.5 miles away from the downtown area. That was the Behavioral Health Network, BHN City Clinic Opioid Treatment Program, and Tapestry's Narcan Peer Distribution Program are the 2 initiatives that I'll be speaking about today. Next slide, please. All right, so BHN's City Clinic Opioid Treatment Program was put in place to address the treatment desert. Like I said, the only other methadone program in the area was about 4 miles from the downtown area. Holyoke does have public transportation. They have a bus that goes out there regularly. However, it's usually on the hour. So every hour it would travel out to the other methadone clinic in the area. For some folks that just didn't work, even taking the public transportation, you would have to get off at a certain stop and still walk half a mile to the methadone clinic. So again, there was definitely a treatment desert in the area. Establishing this right in downtown. The location that it's at now, it's a block away from the bus terminal. So individuals that are taking public transportation to get to treatment have to cross the street and walk down the street a little further, and they get to the treatment program here on Maple Street. They created referral partnerships with 2 local medical centers, Recovery Center and the Court. There is a recovery center that's just about 2 blocks away from this, and the Court was right down the street. So again, having this at a central location where it was a lot more accessible to folks, especially in Holyoke and downtown, where you don't necessarily need public transportation, but as long as you're down there, it's a block away from everything else. Healing Communities were able to fund an NP, a RN, a care coordinator, and a recovery coach to get them started. Next slide. So as they grew, as they started, again, this is something that started in about 18 months. The fact that they were able to open up a methadone clinic, an OTP in downtown Holyoke in about 18 months in the middle of a worldwide pandemic just says a lot of the work that went into this, not only with the healing community study, but individuals that were involved with it with the onset in Holyoke. It's great efforts all around to get this open and operated. It is currently treating 492 individuals. Since its inception, it's increased its clinical team to 5 clinicians. It hosts 3 doctor days, welcoming walk-ins and direct admissions from hospitals and jails. Having doctor days, it provides an opportunity where individuals are seeking wound care, having conversations with with medical providers. If they don't have a PCP, they can get enrolled in one or enrolled in Mass Health as well. An opportunity to kind of just seek medical treatment as well while they're there. However, there is some challenges. The ever-changing drug supply, that's something that we battle every day. Trying to stay on top of trends. Here in Holyoke, we've seen, since the onset of fentanyl a little while back, we've seen xylazine, we're seeing nitazines, we're seeing metatizine. We see a lot of different stuff in the street drug supply. So it's trying to stay on top of that and ever challenges that they're seeing there, but throughout the city as well. There's an increased need for wound care, especially with the onset of xylazine and the heroin street supply. And they're seeing a lot of that at the clinic as well. There's not enough long-term facilities waiting to take individuals on methadone. So again, Holyoke doesn't have as much services as other cities in the area as well. It is a small city, and they do have the problems of not having so many resources for individuals to try to connect them to. Next slide. So Tapestry's Narcan peer distribution program. This was an opportunity to increase naloxone access among people who use drugs in their social network, not connected to formal overdose prevention services. Recognizes the value of peers as service providers and leaders in their own communities and offers a unique opportunity to connect an undeserved population with supported services. It reached new or underserved populations such as transgender individuals, youth, or sex workers, and expanded access services to Narcan at times and dates the SSP is not open, such as evenings or weekends. So this was a great opportunity where we tapped into our participants at the syringe service program and really utilize them as the experts and as distributors for Narcan. Build that relationship with them, identified peers that would fit this work as well. And tap into their social network. Again, I think we did a good job at the syringe service program, Monday to Friday, 8 to 4, but we all know some of that stuff continues into the evenings, even on weekends. So an opportunity where they were doing some of that work on those hours when we weren't open as well. And tapping into their social network. I think when the program started, it provided a lot of opportunities where people were coming into the syringe service programs for the first time because they were connected through a peer distributor as well at the time. Next slide. All right, Tapestry's Narcan peer distribution program again. Sign-up sheets for peers to volunteer, average of 6 peers per month. Peers were given 5 naloxone kits per week and compensated $5 per kit distributed. Cash compensation was used. It supports dignity and acknowledged peers' work in overdose prevention. Through the study, we were able to distribute 692 Narcan kits, which totals 1,384 total doses. And just kind of touch on some of them bullet points as well. It was the relationship building, especially with the staff at the SSPs, identifying the participants of our program that would be a good fit for the program. Individuals that, were familiar with Narcan, but not only can distribute it, but also train individuals and became trainers themselves and training their individuals in their social networks on how to administer Narcan, signs and symptoms of an overdose, and how to properly respond to one as well. We averaged 6 peers per month. We had to create lists because the demand started growing a lot more. I think we increased it to like 8 peers per month, having 2 every week. And we paid cash. A lot of the times we're asking peers to do some of this work where we're giving gift cards. And that's just providing a disservice to them because, again, with gift cards, they're limited to certain stores that we're getting them from, or even they can't use the gift cards in certain locations. So giving them cash just, again, supported their dignity and knowledge peers work in overdose prevention. Really gave them an opportunity where they felt like they were working at Tapestry. And, I would hear some of the conversations just in the community about, yeah, I work at Tapestry, I'm giving out Narcan, and they would see me and they'd be like, hey, go right. And I would reassure them and the people that they were talking to as well that they were definitely working with us and providing and distributing Narcan. So it was a great opportunity to be part of that initiative. especially in Holyoke, where we've seen an uptick in overdoses at the time. Last slide. Yeah. So this last slide here is something that we put up in Holyoke. It's just a mural dedicated to one of our staff at Tapestry. But it was a lot of help from peers and also members of our program. Just a lot of influence with that, and just a conversation about in Holyoke, being in Holyoke, and having everybody involved with that as well. And that's all I have. I know I could have kind of showed.
Thank you, Pedro.
Yeah.
Holyoke was a really great example of one using data-driven decision-making, because it's very compelling to see a map of, here's where either people live or people overdose, and here's your nearest either methadone clinic or treatment facility. So that's very persuasive. And I also thought it was really interesting, the experimentation with actually providing cash for people who use drugs to distribute naloxone.
That was huge, and a lot of
Yeah.
people questioned the cash and just
Yeah.
the integrity of it. Like, are people is it a cash grab for folks? And we were worried about that as well. And again, it was identifying our peers, and having those conversations with individuals, and that relationship building that we do have with the folks, and able to signal identify peers that can actually do this work, that were trustworthy enough, where they would be able to provide the education, distribute the Narcan in their social networks as well.
All right, thank you, Pedro. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please go ahead and enter them in Q&A. We have one more presenter. This is Abby Spears, and Abby is the Executive Director of Scioto Connect in Portsmouth, Ohio. She is also a lifelong resident of Scioto County. She is the 7th of 8 children, but was definitely her parents' favorite. She is the youngest girl, and she currently spends her time when she's not doing outreach with her partner and 3 cats. And one fun fact about Abby is that she learned to write her name when she was only 4 so she could get her own library card. So there you go.
Thanks, Scott. I
Yeah,
figured
you're
that was a
welcome.
good
Yeah.
I figured that was a good lead in for just establishing that I'm a bit of a nerd, not in a bad way, but it's good to have interests. Books and data and, science fiction are mine. So, but as Scott said, I am the executive director of Scioto Connect. And Braden, if you don't care to go to the next slide. And I live here in Portsmouth, Ohio, to provide a little bit of background. So Scioto County, established in 1803. We sit along the banks of the Ohio River, and we're actually the county seat, Portsmouth, sits at the confluence of both the Scioto and Ohio River. So back when it was established, and up into the early decades of the 20th century, Portsmouth and the surrounding county were really a booming area. We had a number of shoe factories, railroad yards, steel industry. But, unfortunately, as much of Appalachia, and I think the Rust Belt area that we're a part of, experienced that deindustrialization. We saw the economic downturn and the economic depression that followed. Next slide. And, with that, as it kind of says, Portsmouth had once been known as the Peerless City, believed to be really unmatched around. And through the kind of loss of economic base, the loss of taxes, loss of tax base, and the forced moves that many people had to experience to, continue to stabilize their lives, especially if they had families. We saw a pretty dramatic change in our community. As such, we saw a housing crisis develop. We saw what then became an avenue and kind of a perfect storm for doctors to come in and really exploit the community and the experiences of the people that were living there. As you'll see, the book there, Prescription for Pain, was recently released by Philip Eli, and it details the account of Dr. Paul Volkman, who was one of the doctors, one of 3 doctors in the area that at one point in time had some of the highest prescribing in the country. As it states there on the slide, we were at one point dubbed the pill mill capital of the US. So this is something that our community has been dealing with for roughly 30 years. And, at one point, as it says there, the prescribing was so high that every adult and child in our community could have received 162 doses of opiates. Next slide. So what that inevitably led to was, as pill mills were shut down in the late aughts and early teens of the, 21st century, we saw the influx of like black tar heroin, which quickly shifted to shake and bake meth, and then the increase of powder fentanyl and powder heroin, which led to a huge explosion of overdose fatalities in our community. Currently, the city of Portsmouth has roughly a population of around 18,000. The county as a whole, a little less than 70,000. So to think that between 2015 and 2022, we lost 531 individuals. With the provisional data released by the state for 2023, that actually is a little over 600 now. With the pandemic, Scioto County saw the highest per capita overdose fatality rate in the state's history. And we have frequently led as the highest overdose death rates, or with the highest overdose death rates in the state of Ohio. Most of our fatalities at this point have been polysubstance, especially fentanyl with stimulants such as methamphetamines and things like that. And, with the introduction of xylazine and other adulterants, not only has it complicated overdoses and overdose response, but it has also increased additional health complications. So things like wounds, folks experiencing amputations, things of that nature. Next slide. So one of the things that we really had to do was understand exactly what was going on in our community. And so one of the ways that we did that was through data, hence data from Star Trek: The Next Generation for folks that may not realize. I told you the nerdiness would make a comeback. And so what we did, and unfortunately my map slides they were not compatible today with the presentation, but we were able to use GIS mapping and use primary source data. So this was information that we had collected through like our harm reduction program, working with first responders to collect non-fatal overdose response data, as well as with like our overdose fatality review to collect the fatal overdose information, as well as working with like our local engineer's office to collect abandoned and blighted property information. And we use this and we're able to map it to really kind of be able to see across our community where the areas, where our areas that were suffering the highest burden of injury were. And so what this meant is that, as a rural area, but also too, as, Portsmouth is a small city. There were often specific neighborhoods. This wasn't you've got 10 zip codes within a city area. This was, one zip code here may incorporate the city, a village, and 2 other unincorporated areas. So being able to really granularly examine where we needed to focus outreach and efforts was truly like a necessity to providing the best outreach and supports our community. One of the other things that we were able to do with mapping is do comparative mapping. So much like Pedro was talking before, when you look at areas that oftentimes are suffering your highest burden of injury and people are experiencing, a lot of like overdoses, things of that nature, these are often your most under-resourced areas. And that's what we saw too. Next slide. So as Radonna had mentioned before, Ohio had worked with many communities that already had established coalitions. Scioto County was one of those, and we were a Wave 1 community. So when we were initially approached, our Adams board helped to facilitate the connection with the Healing Community Study. And at the time, we had been the Scioto County Collaborative Opioid Consortium, which was quite a mouthful. But after sitting down and meeting with the team members that were part of the study, we knew that this was just a spectacular opportunity. What we were going to be able to do in terms of working with the already really engaged organizations that we had, as well as potentially being able to bring in more folks and get more individuals in our community involved, as well as having both the practical kind of human support as well as fiscal support to be able to really implement a broad range of opportunities and initiatives. Next slide. So just to kind of give an overview of what our Healing Community Study experience looked like, Scioto County was able to implement 31 different strategies. These are a combination of both active and passive strategies. So this ranged from things around transportation initiatives, expanding to navigation and MOUD access in our jail facilities, implementation of a port program, as well as, passive naloxone expansion strategies. We were able to increase both community and organizational engagement. And this really helped us to bring more individuals in terms of having an understanding of the importance of evidence-based strategies and using data-driven solutions in terms of how we address both the opioid crisis and the overdose crisis in our area. We were also able, through the communication strategies, we had some truly kind of spectacular digital interactions across both social media, as well as a lot of streaming platforms. And this was great for us. We were able to utilize those areas to initiate a lot of conversation with our community members, as well as provide additional support information. As some of the others have talked about, we have a community of folks that were also really fearful about responding to overdoses. And a lot of that stemmed from not having a working knowledge or even any knowledge about the Ohio Good Samaritan laws. So we were able to include that information in how we educated people. And it really also too, as they talked about with kind of the different initiatives and the buckets that were available under the ORCA menu, as well as with communications, we were able to find and really help to provide a good platform for people in our community that wanted to champion these different initiatives. So folks that were passionate about expanding MOUD access, people that wanted to help increase MOUD retention, expand harm reduction strategies, naloxone access, all of these different things. Next slide. And, I think, as was mentioned before, when we started the study as a Wave 1 community, the first experience that we had was COVID. And, thankfully we were in Ohio, we were working with, universities here, and we were able to really navigate that situation in a proactive manner as much as we could. The universities that we were working with that were helping to that were our partners with the study, we were able to, very quickly allocate funds to both expand our Project Dawn secondary sites. We went from one primary location to 8 secondary sites that were a combination of churches, community organizations, and community centers. And, that in our harm reduction program. And that was, truly just an incredible benefit to our community. They also were able to provide the naloxone purchasing support. And, as you see, during 2020, we, may have experienced the highest overdose rate, but we also, like, the folks that were coming into our harm reduction program just that year alone performed 1,617 naloxone reversals. And for a community our size, like, that's profound. Next. And, one of the other strategies for us, I think that was just really beneficial, in, we have had an active harm reduction program here in Sauter County since 2011. And in 2020, we were able to move off site to a community location. And after that, like, we started working to integrate a naloxone navigator, a harm reduction MOUD navigator into our harm reduction program. So, at that point, with moving into a community location, the program was having roughly around 1,000 interactions per month. We were, servicing individuals from roughly around 60 different zip codes. And so having the navigator come in, they were able to provide, an on-site assessment with ASAM-based criteria for folks that were seeking services. Because inherently, the goal has always been to meet people truly where they are. And, it's also understanding the challenges in our community. As a rural area, transportation is a huge issue. Many people don't have personal vehicles, and we do not have really any kind of public transit. So, having a space that we knew people were going to come to and being able to offer those services there, was really an important part of helping to create this strategy. The navigators worked with, like, local providers to help link folks to either methadone, buprenorphine, as well as naltrexone. The predominant version of naltrexone used here is Vivitrol. And so, folks, normally we would see linkages of roughly between like 7 to 10 linkages per month directly to MOUD providers. And, one of the great things too was that navigators were able to do kind of like longitudinal follow-up. So they were able to, continue to check in with individuals that they had, provided linkage to care services to. And folks would often return to navigators to help sometimes find additional wraparound services. So folks, even before they ever considered accessing treatment, would work with the navigator to, find primary health care, access mental health care, testing services, and a variety of things. Next slide. And, I think the mobile unit kind of worked in companion with that, in truly kind of building on the concept of meeting people where they were. As I said, we knew from the mapping that we had done that we had really underserved areas and certain areas that had zero services available. Being able to have a mobile unit that offered direct access to Narcan and naloxone, as well as being able to have a navigation person that was able to go directly into communities, meant that people that even potentially that didn't access the harm reduction program, but still were looking for services, were able to find. And, that was something that continued to grow throughout, our time, because we finished in June of 2022. And, the community expansion as far as locations had gone from 2 up to, I believe, 6. And, we have continued to add locations, standing outreach events to help make sure that people have their needs met. Next. And so I think to really look at, or at least just as an overview of, I think, kind of what were some of the most important things for us as a community, is that, collective community engagement was absolutely necessary. And, our coalition incorporated, as many sectors as we could in our community. And that ranged from public education, local universities, public health agencies, criminal justice, public defenders, to, just local concerned citizens. Because for many folks, they want to help, but they're not affiliated with an agency or an organization, but they want to be involved. And so creating a space that allowed people to do that. And I think like, especially, you know, ensuring that you have folks that have lived and living experience is truly just integral to building things and to building initiatives and creating programs that actually are relevant and meet the needs of the community. You know, I know nobody likes to be told what they need and not be asked. And it's also, you know, that's how you create programs that don't accomplish anything other than wasting money. And nobody wants to do that. You know, I think too, like for us, like a huge component as well was making sure, you know, understanding the many intersectional factors that often incorporate kind of, you know, the things that create the struggle in your community. You know, we have people that are experiencing not just the trauma of poverty, the trauma of being unhoused, of lacking food security, you know, but they're also navigating undiagnosed or untreated mental health issues, lack of access to healthcare. I mean, just a whole, you know, scope of things. And it is very easy to, I think, sometimes overlook all of these different components and factors that contribute to or, you know, are potentially a reason why someone seeks substances. You know, as I had told people many times, like, you know, understanding that for some folks, the substances that they're using are what are keeping them alive, is how we, you know, talk to folks and help them find ways to, you know, navigate their experience and relationship with substances and what they need.
Yeah, but you have about 1 minute left.
Oh, thank you. But I think also too, like, you know, and others have touched on it, just kind of addressing stigma and implicit bias. You know, again, to reiterate, the strategies have to be evidence-based, backed in science, and data-driven. And that, you know, for me, I think one of the best things was healing communities put me in touch with a lot of people that knew a lot more than I did, which I think is a huge part of how you make your community better. I don't ever want to walk in and be the smartest person in the room. I don't actually ever want to walk in and think that I'm the smartest person in the room, because there are always people that know more and are better experienced than I am. And that's how we learn, and that's how we make our communities better, and that's how we help our communities heal. And so next slide. But yeah, I mean, like I said, healing communities was a truly incredible experience. And for us, it really did help to build an ecosystem of support and care for the folks that, you know, for our community as a whole, and how we look at as well as address navigating substance use and all of the many factors that are a part of it. So thank you all for listening and for letting me be a part of the panel. I did put my email there, so if anybody did have any questions following this, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Abby. Really appreciate it. The thing I like about Portsmouth and Scioto County is that you know, that you're adopting this as a shared problem. And, you know, and I'm also surprised you didn't mention your Guinness Book of World Record. So
I
Portsmouth
know.
has like the most Christmas presents being wrapped. And what's the other one?
We actually, yes, we do have two. So the most plants ever being potted simultaneously. And then yes, for the most people singing Christmas carols simultaneously. It also helped us become a Hallmark holiday city. So, you know, all
Well,
the fun stuff.
congratulations on your big achievement there.
Thank you.